think we're just good afternoon. So delighted to see so many faces today. So today we're going to be talking about accelerating adoption by using AI to support skills transition. And we're going to try, hopefully, and give you some practical examples. Most organisations aren't short of technology, but the bit that's a bit harder is kind of which are the tools that matter, how do we deploy them safely and ethically, and how do we turn investment in that technology into workforce impact and inclusive growth. So we're going to try and, like I say, keep the conversation practical, talking about kind of how work will change, what that will mean for skills, and what leaders can do now to move from insight into action. And I'm delighted to welcome here Niale from KPMG, who will talk about translating AI adoption into the practical question of task-level workforce analysis, planning tools, and how learning technology can support real skills transition. And hopefully Gregg Hutchings, who's known to you, I'm sure, from the Financial Services Skills Commission as their Programme Director, who's going to give us some sector and employer perspective on where firms are getting stuck, what the evidence is telling us, and what next that will help financial services. And as with all the other sessions, please do, I've got the trusty iPad here, so please do put your questions through. But I'm going to start with you first, Niale, if I may, and hopefully you'll set us up. Been a lot of talk today about AI changing roles and skills in practice. Crucially, thinking through how firms use AI and technology to understand, to plan, and activate the skills transition.
Yeah, definitely. And it's we've been on a journey as everyone else has with AI, and for the last really 3 years we've been doing quite a lot of in-depth studies around actually how does AI impact role on like an individual basis, and how firms can really go about sort of taking that to a real sort of detailed level, and therefore be able to really start planning actually how is AI impacting what people do on a day-to-day basis, and how that's impacting what skills that they will need in the future. I'm going to stick with the stereotype of being a consultant with slides, unfortunately, but I have brought some just to really sort of try and break down for you how we're seeing AI impacts the workforce. So we see an individual job being effectively a group of tasks. So if you had a finance manager, one of those tasks would be analysing, reporting records, and a bunch of other things as well. But if we were to take, say, a workforce role which is at 100% capacity and they've got all of these tasks they do as part of their stack, the first thing we need to understand is how AI and different types of AI is actually impacting this workforce role. The first one we're going to look at is agentic AI. So this has been, one of the newest developments in AI of recent. These have the ability to complete the task themselves. So effectively, when we look at how this impacts the human role, we effectively automate those tasks away. The worker no longer almost needs to think about them, they're just being done in the background. And this creates a capacity within the workforce. So for illustration sense, this has created 20% capacity in this person. We then look at AI tooling. So here we're looking at ChatGPT, Copilot, things that act as an assistant to you to help you do the work which remains almost in your task stack. And this brings out a varied level of capacity back to the employee because it affects roles and tasks differently. So for example, if it's AI right now is really good if you're looking to review contracts or review documents. It's very good at words. We're still sort of getting up to speed with the numerical elements. So that might have a bigger impact than others. Now, this is where most companies are sort of at right now, where we've identified a few things, we've brought AI in, and people are starting to use things like Copilot and those being adopted. But at this point, this is kind of the sticking point. If there's a takeaway to take from today is how you get past this point. There's a big question about AI value right now in the market. If actually, we've spent a lot of technology, have we received sort of that ROI back? The issue is right now we've just got a person who's got extra time and we're not sure what that time's been spent on. Is it value add stuff? Is it not? So we actually need to evolve the role. We need to bring in new tasks, to this role to then bring someone up to 100% capacity working in an AI-enabled way. Now, the thing that underpins all of this is skills. So we need people to be able to know the AI skills in order to get those capacity savings in with the AI assistants, the co-pilots, etc. And we need the new skills of which their role is evolving into. So that's how we're looking at that. And there's actually, we're looking at this as doing a very data-driven approach towards this. We're building tools to actually help us break down all of these type of roles across our workforce to really understand where is the big roles impacted by AI and how can we start to move those along. So we've got a tool called Maestro, which actually does all this deconstructions of roles into tasks and skills and helps us to understand what the difference is. My final bit I want to focus on is just on the sort of the learning journey of all this. How does these types of tools inform the learning journey? And we've actually got these sort of 3 questions here, which we need sort of learning departments, HR departments to really start focusing on. That is, where is our data and content stored? What do people need to learn? And where is the right place for them to access that learning? And for us, this means understanding what the roles are currently and the skill sets currently, and also what the roles are going to be in the future, and therefore what the skills are going to be in the future. And then the experience layer is actually having applications which sit on the employee's desktop where they do work. So for instance, we've got an application called Spark, which sits on people's teams, and effectively you can access that and say, I've got 10 minutes, I'm about to go into a meeting tomorrow about oil and gas, can you give me some content? And get that sort of hyper-personalized, hyper-on-demand content to really start helping them to bridge the role between what their skills are now and in the future. So Louise, hopefully that brings to life just a few things that we're focused on here. As I said, whenever we ask people about, I think it's a general question in society when you ask people, well, what are those job roles of the future? What should I be telling my kids to go and do? Their mind always wanders to blue-collar workers because it's very easy to see how AI doesn't impact a plumber who comes to your house. But we, as all professionals, need to start gearing that conversation towards understanding in detail what those white-collar workers will look and roles will be in the future, because that's where there's going to be big impacts, and this is still going to be a fantastic industry to have employment in when AI is at its maturity.
Thank you, Niall. And I think that's really interesting, isn't it? It's what do you do with that extra percentage? And, the conversation just before was about reskilling. So there's clearly a need there. And I'm going to therefore come to you, Gregg, and to build on Niall's point about the task level and that skills need. What are you seeing from a financial services perspective across the sector? And where are firms getting stuck in turning that insight into adoption? And what would help them move faster? I mean, what a question.
I know, that's big, that.
Particularly if you can talk about inclusion as well. So not just fast, but inclusion.
Yeah, sure. Just some thoughts. I mean, I would really, encourage people to read the report in tandem with the ideas, the models that Niall's presented, because I think what really struck me when I read the report was the visualization of how AI is really changing the way we work to a task level, and I think that's really important, and that's something that I know our members have been trying to get to grips with. How do we understand the work we're doing, the roles that in our current organisation, and how they are stacked with tasks? And what we're seeing is organisations across the sector are really trying to understand that, but perhaps getting stuck into how do we convert that real adoption of AI into an understanding of a lot of people's roles currently through that lens. But obviously there is some practical challenges around some of the technology. We picked this up in the report. There's great ambition amongst firms to start rolling out this technology, but there's clashing where there's a bit of stickiness with the limited evidence around kind of how it can be used. Perhaps looking at the governance risks, some of the workforce confidence, and some of those hard constraints like data and legacy systems. So there is actually a reality that firms are dealing with there. But I think our research has been really clear that we need to continue and carry on trying to move in that direction of disaggregating work into tasks and really thinking through how do we redesign our workflow to really understand what we can do with the technology and how we can enable people to grow in that way. I think there's a lot that's in there about who can do what. I mean, we're seeing that firms are trying to move towards that sort of work redesign, really understanding the difference between automation and augmentation. And I think that sort of plays into that model that Niale has just talked about. Looking at collective action and looking at where we can share knowledge around that. And that's a big part of what the Commission does, is to try and, if you like, communicate, to circle those ideas around. But in terms of investment, I think we've been talking a lot about, for a few years now with our members, is this idea of teaming and hybrid teams. So this report talking about hybrid people, I think, is really a big part of what firms are trying to get to grips with. And there's a great concept in the report about purple people. Now, if you go on, if you Google purple people, you'll get something in the social media world that's very different. Or in your personal world, not sinister, it's very sweet. Have a look at that in your own time. But purple people in the workplace, this idea that people that can blend the technical skills with those human customer facing, those people skills, so they can really work collaboratively in those teams. And how do we build more of those people? And I think that's something that actually we can start to do through the acts of learning. Some of the things we've got in our framework, like adaptability, about empathy, about those really key things that 5 years ago people were, so how do you train people for that? Well, actually, learning in itself will build those skills, particularly if you've got AI systems that you're putting people in front of that they can use straight away. Yeah. I could give you lots more examples, but there's some great ones in the report there about how do you build confidence as well in teams to use the technology. There's a great example in the report from Zurich about where they looked at claims handling and actually doing practical uses of AI to support that part of the business, to actually really build confidence in that part of the business, and then that kind of rippled out across the organisation to really inspire the rest of the organisation to want to be involved in that type of work.
Yeah. And one of the things, just listening to you there, Gregg, is about role modelling. So leaders role modelling use of AI. So we've had a few speakers this morning who've been talking about their own personal use and how their own careers are developing. So I think there's also something behest in us as leaders to kind of create that psychological safety to say, well, I might not know, but I'll learn, or actually, where do I need to reskill? I'm going to keep on the theme then of kind of, again, some more actionable insight and kind of, more actions that people can take. Please, by the way, do send some questions through. I've still got one on youth unemployment here, which I'll probably struggle to answer. So keep them coming through for Gregg and Niale. I'm going to come back to you, Niale. So if a firm wants to move from experimentation of AI to scaled deployment, scaled adoption, what's the first practical diagnostic it should run? How do they look at the tasks, roles, skills, governance, etc.?
Yeah, definitely. So we are actually, I have to say, in the last sort of 12 months, really seeing a shift in AI strategy in firms. It's been, I think we went through the phase when AI sort of first came about, everyone saying, I've got to be doing something, I've got to sort of get this tech in, or I'm going to fall behind. And if I'm honest, it's a little bit sort of scattergun, and it was very tech first. So, effectively, oh, that looks cool, let's get that in. What we're seeing is now, and what we're definitely advising clients is actually, you're going to get the value from your AI from evolving your people layer and evolving, the skills that those people have, what people spend their time on, and getting people to really focus on those sort of human value add tasks. So start with your people. Start with how work is currently done, and taking this kind of this sort of data-driven approach of how is work currently done in my organisation really then helps you to understand, okay, well, what are the high impacted roles from AI? What are the low impacted roles of AI? And then be able to sort of say, right, well, let's go for sort of hyper adoption, real good adoption support, a lot of like learning around AI in these areas, and then start to understand actually how can we start shifting these roles to move into those sort of, you could say, AI-enabled roles of the future. So I think just take part the tech aside, you'll be able to find an AI solution for whatever you need, and really start on the people angle and have that as the sort of anchor as you go through your strategy.
I love that. Start with the people. And moving to you then, Gregg, then like from that kind of sector sector perspective, what needs to be true for that kind of employer action to add up and support the transition across financial services?
Yeah, I love that word, true. One person's version of the truth, but I think it's important. I think there is some things that we can hold true in this, and particularly if we want an inclusive skills transition and to talk about all the issues that we've talked about, pathways and about trying to keep people and build a bridge to the sector, and to future employment. I think firstly, skills need to be visible in the organisation. Our members have done an incredible amount of work over the last few years to really understand their organisation through the lens of skills, looking at the job architecture. That work is still relevant. If we're moving to a task model or thinking about work through the lens of tasks, that's part of the way there. You can only understand a job through skills if you understand what someone is doing and what they need to do within that. So I think that, the common frameworks, the shared language, the visualization to everyone in the firm about how is work being done inside an organisation. Firms are still on that journey, and I think that's really important. I think the second one I would call out is access to reskilling in the broader sense. How do we scale that? I think we heard some great examples from Lloyd's there about how you are starting to reskill people through involving them in technology. We always used to think about reskilling as moving you from A to B, and upskilling was adding a bit on top, but actually there's a lot more three-dimensional moves for people now inside firms, and that act of learning is going to build that adaptability. Is particularly people, another example that was used before, get that application opportunity early to use those skills. And building on that, I think the third thing that organisations need to think about, and this might, not sit there, fully yet, regardless of talent marketplaces or culture, is that mobility needs to become the default. That actually, if we're going to be able to fill capacity where work is needed, where people is needed, we're going to need that movement around organisations, and skills-based moves are a way to do that. If you're seeing people through the lens of their skills, you're understanding work through the lens of tasks, then hopefully that mobility is going to be there. But that's a journey to get an organisation into that shape. So I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted about this, but I do really hear from our members that is what they're driving towards.
Yeah. Can I just build on one of your points there? So your first point about the kind of the journey of people understanding what skills that they have in their organisation. Like whenever we talk to, we talked a lot of clients around their sort of HR data, and you say 6 times out of 10, everyone turns around and says, our HR data is rubbish. And we always get that, and necessarily it's not rubbish. You've just probably got the basics, the basic amount of it, and we need to do, and there's work that can be done. Bear with me on this analogy, it might take a while. So Tesco Club Card understands that a 30-year-old male goes into store on a Friday night and they buy nappies and beer. And they are therefore able to make decisions and put product placements around that to really sort of, you say, increase sales because of that knowledge. We as an organisation necessarily know our employees best when they join the firm. And after that point, we don't really know how their skills evolve in their organisations. I know some people are doing some great work in this space, but on the whole, most organisations just kind of have that sort of static lens when people join, or what their skills should be for a certain job profile. If we are going to, AI we know is going to impact, it's already impacting roles, it's going to definitely impact roles in the future. We need to start almost on this course of how do we build from where we are now to almost this like HR megadata mindset of really understanding how work's done in our organisation. What is the things that we're spending most of our time on, and therefore what skills are we going to need in the future so we can start building to that today. So I think it should be a really sort of key priority, I think, going this next couple of years of building into that sort of HR megadata space.
Thank you, Niall. We're nearly out of time, but there's quite a few questions here. We might be able to answer them separately. There's a really interesting one here, though, from Emma, Gregg, which I'm going to bring to you, about the significant gender gap in AI adoption. And what can we do to minimise that and bring women along at the same speed?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something we've been monitoring around roles and people working in our sector more broadly, and we're seeing that inequities in the balance of the workforce through gender already. With more highly skilled jobs being added to to our sector and more medium and lower skilled jobs disappearing. You know, the same amount of women are taking those highly skilled jobs, just for every 2 men are getting those jobs. So there is a competition element there, but also is it about how do we start thinking through who's taking part in that reskilling, who's accessing those opportunities. And I think this is a big part of what we've been talking to the Women Pivoting into Digital Task Force about, is you can't really do something about that till you understand through your data who's participating in your programs, who is making moves. So those things that we talked about being true, are you making sure you're critically looking at who's benefiting from the work you've done to understand skills, to promote mobility, to reskill at scale? You need to start critically looking at what you're doing around that and put that lens over it. You need the data.
Yeah, and lots of questions around data, and actually, Niale, you kind of answered that, so I think you foresaw that. I'm going to finish on something that I think is just quite an interesting philosophical question, where somebody's asked, Susan, I think, you know, should we want to get everybody to 100% capacity? You know, what about that space for creativity? And I guess, like I say, that is quite a broader philosophical question. And in your own organisations, you know, you'll have different parameters potentially based on grade. But I think, like, my personal view is 100%, you know, like the human-centred skills of curiosity, of creativity, and that critical thinking, they're definitely ones that we want to, you know, see supported in our human workforce, augmented by AI in the future. But I will draw us to a close there. I think that the lesson is that kind of everything needs to come together, kind of that task level data, the skills that you need, projecting kind of, you know, where you will reskill your workforce, and importantly, kind of using tools responsibly and kind of with a strong governance theme as well. But hopefully that's useful insight. Like I say, we'll take away some of these questions and see if we can answer them at a later time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.